Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. In this video, I want to talk to you about the Clinical Research Associate role. Maybe you've heard about this role as a CRA or as a monitor of clinical trials, and maybe you're interested because whether you come from a scientific background or not, you have passion, you have interest for clinical research. And I want to give you some details on how the activities and the tasks and responsibilities of this role looks like. Did you know that every single clinical trial requires to have a CRA monitoring that clinical trial? And why is that? Well, there's a framework that's called the ICH GCP that regulates every single clinical trial. And this regulation requires every sponsor of a clinical trial, so a pharmaceutical company, a biotech company, to have and to allocate and to assign a monitor to every single clinical trial. The ICH GCP, where we currently stand with version E6R2, specifies exactly what monitoring means. ICH GCP, standing currently at E6R2 version, specifies that it is the responsibility of the sponsor to monitor and to ensure that the clinical trials are being monitored. This regulation also says that the way we monitor, so the type of monitoring that we perform, it's going to be according to the needs of every single clinical trial. And the ICH GCP E6R2 also mentions why we do monitoring in clinical trials. And there's three specific reasons mentioned in E6R2, and I think we can all relate to that and we can understand the importance of what we're doing as CRAs. Reason number one is to ensure that the human rights and the well-being of the patients that are participating in our clinical trials is ensured. Now, if we look back into the history, we know that clinical research has been entangled with atrocity that have occurred because or in name of clinical research. And we want to make sure that that does not happen ever again. And as clinical research associates, I always say that we have a responsibility into ensuring that that doesn't happen. And CRAs are part of that. CRAs ensure that what is being done, what is being conducted to the patients in our clinical trials is ethical, is moral, is according to regulation, is according to the protocol, and it is, for God's sake, logical and safe. And the second reason we prefer monitoring in clinical trials is to ensure that the data we generate and we report to the ethics committees and to the regulatory authorities who later on will approve this drug to go on the market or not, we need to ensure that this data is exact, it's precise, it's correct, and we are reporting accurate data. Because imagine the worst that can happen is that we have a drug approved to be on the market and to be delivered and administered to people in everywhere in the world that is based on data that is inaccurate and incorrect. That's certainly not safe. And there's a third reason why we do monitoring in clinical trials, and it is to ensure that what we do, every single step in this clinical trial, is according to and compliant with the protocol, the ICH GCP, this framework that I just mentioned, and any and every regulation that we have, not only globally, but also for your local geographical location. Right, and you might think, oh, that's so cool. What CRAs are doing is actually so meaningful and so relevant to people, to society, and I want to contribute to that. So who can be a CRA? Now let me refer back to what ICH GCP says, and then I will tell you from my experience of managing a community for CRAs, who can be a CRA. The ICH GCP says that a CRA must be properly trained or should have the scientific and or clinical knowledge needed to monitor the clinical trial accordingly. Now, this doesn't mean that you need a master's degree in clinical trial monitoring. There are certain locations in the world, like for example, countries like Italy, who are very specific on what the certifications or accreditations you must have to become a CRA. So depending on the country that you live in, make sure that you check what are the requirements to become a CRA. But generally, in every country in the world, with very few exceptions, you do not need a master's degree to become a CRA. Now, what this regulation says is that you need to prove that you have a certain exposure, knowledge, training, that you understand the concepts of clinical research, how it works, its framework, and how to do your job properly. Now, let's say that you just finished your bachelor degree and you finished pharmacy, or maybe you are a nurse, or maybe you are a biomedical student, or maybe you did anything related with the scientific background. That's fantastic. You already have what many of us who were CRAs did not have, a scientific background. And I must say that myself, I was a CRA for over 5 years and I did not come from a scientific background. I will tell you more about how I became a CRA and what my experience as a CRA was in another video, so make sure you sign up to this channel and check that video as well. So what do you exactly need to become a CRA? And to me, the secret is passion. if you have passion and curiosity for this specific niche, for clinical research, for contributing to the clinical research environment, to contributing to bringing drugs to the market, to contributing to people's life, to patients' life, that's all you need. Of course, you need to develop some certain skills which you can proactively learn. You can proactively practice and take courses or learn about it, read a couple books, get some internships, or maybe volunteer at some sites if you have that possibility. But the most important thing is that you've made a decision to become a CRA, and now you're going to act upon that decision by developing those skills, by exposing yourself to the knowledge, by taking a couple courses that you've seen around that people are doing and that are being recognized. So you're on the good path. Now, let's say you've made that decision already. You want to become a CRA, and now your interest is, well, can you tell me exactly what a CRA does? How does the daily activities of a CRA look like? And I like to separate the activities that the CRA do in two categories. One is support, and the second one is monitoring. A CRA is assigned to a certain amount of sites, of clinical sites, so hospital, a clinic that you will monitor, and you will make sure that they receive all the support to conduct and operate this clinical trial. And support can take very different shapes and forms, right? It can be guidance on how to perform a specific assessment for the patient, or it can be guidance on how to document the data that they're generating in the patient visits, or it can be making sure that they have all the equipment that they need, that the equipments are not expired, that the certificates are not expired, that the training certificates are not expired, or making sure that the facility has every equipment material that you need to do the patient visits. And support can also be a little bit more administrative, let's say. It can be that you're constantly checking your trackers from the office to know how many laboratory kits the site has left for their patient visits. Or it can also be a quality check of the investigator site file, making sure that the site has archived every single document they must do so required by regulation. Support can also mean that you're constantly available on the phone or on the email in case your sites have any questions from you. Maybe they have a patient coming in with a specific adverse event and they need some guidance on what to do, how to perform with this visit now that they see that the patient has an unexpected, let's say, reaction to the study drug or to anything else. Of course, when it comes to support, there's many things that you will not know on how to guide your sites. But that's why you have a study team, you have a sponsor, and you have a medical monitor to who you will ask your own questions so that you can better support your sites. And the second category of what the CRA's activities or responsibilities are is monitoring, which is exactly what gives the name to a clinical trial monitor, right? The core of our task. And monitoring, of course, means that review, that check of the data that is being generated every single day continuously in the clinical trial, and that is being reported through an EDC system, which is an electronic data capture system, is that tool where we enter all the data that we're generating and we're monitoring in the clinical trial. And when it comes to the types of monitoring, there's also different types of monitoring that a CRA can perform. It might be that you're reviewing every single data that is generated for every single patient in your clinical trial, or it might be that you're monitoring a specific amount of data from that patient of a percentage of patients that are enrolled in the clinical trial. And of course, a CRA that is assigned to a clinical trial is also trained on what the assessments are to be done to the patients in this clinical study. So part of your monitoring might also mean that you need to make sure and review that all the assessments that are being done to the patients are according to the protocol and how they should be performed. And you know how they should be performed because you have documents that tell you how to do so. So maybe you have a laboratory manual, or maybe you have a pharmacy manual, and every time you monitor the data at the pharmacy or at the laboratory, you're making sure that these assessments are being done or the samples are being collected as these lab manual or pharmacy manuals are telling you to do so. And the question that remains now is to how many clinical studies a CRA can be assigned to. And the answer really depends on the type of clinical trial. Imagine that there is a clinical study that is an observational study. You're only visiting your sites every 6 months, you're performing monitoring visits every 6 months, and you only have 4 sites for this clinical study. Of course, you have a lot of time. There isn't many activities that you need to perform, and that means it gives you space to monitor other clinical trials at the same time. But there are other type of clinical trials, let's say a phase 3 oncology trial, in which you have to perform monitoring visits every 2 weeks and you have 7 sites, so you just have to do the math. There is no space for you to monitor other clinical trials. So it really depends. As for the frequency of monitoring visits, it also depends as well. Depending on the type of clinical trial, maybe you visit, as I just said, your clinical sites every 2 weeks, or maybe you visit them every 6 months, and the rest of activities are done from home or from the office as site management activities. It can be, but I would say that a traveling CRA who performs monitoring visit on site does around 6 monitoring visit days per month. More than that, it can be a little bit challenging, and less than that, it might mean that it's an observational study, or you're an in-house CRA, or you're doing remote monitoring. And you might also wonder, well, where would I be traveling? Well, a CRA is usually assigned to monitor clinical sites that are within their region. So let's say I was a CRA in Barcelona and I was monitoring clinical sites that were in Spain. And the reason behind that is because you have easier access to the clinical site as you need to travel. Maybe you need to take a train or a flight, and within your own country is easier. Of course, the United States is a bit different because the region is so much bigger that you might have different CRAs assigned in different locations for the same clinical study. And another aspect to keep in mind is that you need the local language. Although English might be your preferred language of communication at your company or within your study team, it doesn't mean that your sites, especially if you're a non-English speaking country, it doesn't mean that they need to know English as well as you do in order to communicate with you. And especially the medical records and all the source data, what we call the data generated from the patient or at the site, will probably be in the local language. Now, I want to be transparent and very honest with you. The CRA role can be a little bit challenging, and if it's the traveling part that attracts you to this role, it might not be enough, because even though we have this idealistic idea of what traveling for work is, it doesn't always necessarily mean that you will have time to do some tourism or to walk around or to try some new restaurants. Sometimes it might only mean that you are taking a taxi, going to the airport, taking a flight, going to your site, doing your monitoring visit, and coming back straight away because you're so tired and you need to perform the monitoring visit again next day. Sometimes it is true that you have investigator meetings everywhere or anywhere in the world, and it will take you through wonderful locations that you will discover as part of your traveling. But I want you to also consider that traveling a lot or frequent traveling might also mean that you're not that much at home, that you might need to be flexible with your personal schedule or with your private life. But I do want you to remember that the CRA role, the beauty of this role is that you're contributing to something much bigger than yourself. You're contributing to bringing drugs to the market, drugs that in the end might save people's lives. And sometimes these patients do not have any other option of treatment for their specific disease. And what's greater than that? Now, if what I just told you about the clinical research associate role sounds interesting to you, and maybe you want to consider it for yourself, subscribe to this channel so that you're notified when I post the next video, how I became a CRA. Thank you for watching. Bye!